In May 2023, a security camera on a quiet street in Busan captured a deeply unsettling piece of footage. A young woman in a standard high school uniform is seen calmly walking down the sidewalk in the middle of the night. She is pulling a large, heavy black suitcase behind her, but there are two terrifying details about this footage. First, the suitcase is leaking human blood. Second, the girl pulling it is not a high school student. South Korea is built like a physical fortress. The streets are spotless, violent crime barely exists, and there is a surveillance camera watching almost every single corner. You can walk home alone at 2 o'clock in the morning and never have to look over your shoulder. But the internet has fundamentally changed how predators hunt. You no longer have to worry about a criminal physically breaking down your front door, because in South Korea, the danger doesn't wait in dark alleys. It waits in the apps you use every single day. The digital world has given predators a skeleton key. They don't need to break in, they just need you to invite them inside. When we think of a murderer, we look for a motive we can understand. We look for revenge, financial greed, or a crime of passion. We want the violence to make sense because if it makes sense, we can convince ourselves that we know how to avoid it. But the internet has bred a new kind of predator, one whose motive isn't rooted in emotion, but in morbid, empty curiosity. In early 2023, 23-year-old Jung Yoo-jung was living in Busan, South Korea. She was an unemployed loner. She had failed her college entrance exams. She had no job, and she rarely left the home she shared with her grandfather. Instead, she spent her days completely isolated, consuming massive amounts of true crime content. She read murder mystery novels, watched investigative documentaries, and checked out crime books from the local library. But Jung Yoo-jung reached a terrifying psychological threshold. She didn't want to just consume true crime anymore. She wanted to create it. She decided that she wanted to kill someone simply to see if she could pull off the perfect crime. To do this, she didn't wander the streets looking for a random target. That leaves too much to chance. She needed a victim who would willingly let her inside their home. She needed someone who was alone, vulnerable, and completely unsuspecting. And to find them, she weaponized the gig economy. South Korea has a massive market for private education, and there are dozens of mobile matchmaking apps designed to connect parents with freelance tutors. These apps are built on a foundation of trust. If you are a university student trying to make extra money, you assume the person messaging you is just a concerned parent looking out for their child's education. Jung downloaded one of these popular tutoring apps and created a completely fabricated profile. She did not pose as a student, she posed as a mother. This is where the cold, calculating nature of her digital deception becomes truly terrifying. Jung did not just message the first person she saw. Over the course of several months, she contacted 54 different tutors. She was actively and methodically filtering them. She asked them questions about their living situations, where their lessons took place, and their schedules. She was hunting for the perfect target, a young woman who conducted lessons in her own home and lived entirely alone. In late May 2023, after filtering through dozens of candidates, she finally found her mark. It was a 26-year-old female university student working as a freelance English tutor in the southeastern area of Busan. Jung, still posing as the mother, sent a message. She claimed she had a 9th grade daughter who urgently needed English lessons and asked if the tutor could teach her at her home. The 26-year-old tutor agreed, completely unaware that the mother she was messaging did not exist, and the daughter she was about to teach was a 23-year-old predator who had spent months researching how to conceal a body. With the trap set, Jung needed a disguise. She went online and purchased a standard South Korean high school uniform. On the afternoon of May 26, 2023, Jung put on the uniform. Because she was short in stature and wearing the traditional school clothing, she looked exactly like a harmless, everyday teenage girl. She traveled to the tutor's apartment and knocked on the door. When the 26-year-old tutor looked through the peephole, she didn't see a threat. She saw a 9th grade student arriving for her first English lesson. She unlocked the door, smiled, and invited the girl inside. The moment the door closed, the illusion vanished. Jung pulled out a weapon she had prepared and relentlessly attacked the completely innocent woman. This was not a quick, panicked altercation. It was an explosion of deeply repressed rage. Jung stabbed the tutor over 110 times. She continued to stab the victim long after she was already dead, ensuring that her morbid curiosity was fully satisfied. But the horror of this case does not end with the murder. It is what Jung did next that reveals the absolute void of empathy in her psychology. After stabbing a woman 110 times, Jung did not flee in a panic. She calmly walked out of the apartment, leaving the body behind, and went to a nearby grocery store. Security camera footage captured her casually walking down the aisles, purchasing heavy-duty trash bags and bottles of bleach. She then went back to her own home, grabbed a large black travel suitcase, and returned to the victim's apartment. This brings us to the worst part of the timeline. To fit the body into the suitcase, Jung spent the next several hours methodically dismembering the 26-year-old woman. She used the bleach to clean the scene, and in a chilling display of true crime knowledge, she deliberately severed the victim's fingers. She knew that if the body was found, the police would use fingerprints for biometric identification. By removing the fingers, taking the victim's mobile phone, and stealing her ID card, Jung believed she was executing the perfect crime, a traceless disappearance. She packed the dismembered remains into the black suitcase. She took off her blood-stained school uniform and actually dressed herself in the dead woman's clothes. Then, in the middle of the night, she walked out of the apartment, pulling the heavy, blood-leaking suitcase behind her. Jung hailed a taxi and asked the driver to take her to a remote wooded area near the Nakdong River. But her perfect crime unraveled because of one variable she couldn't control: human instinct. When the taxi driver dropped her off in the isolated forest, he immediately felt that something was wrong. He had noticed Jung acting strangely, and more importantly, he had seen blood leaking from the heavy suitcase when he helped her unload it. The moment he drove away, he called the police and reported his suspicious passenger. The authorities moved quickly. They tracked Jung down in the woods and arrested her before she could completely dispose of the remains. When the police brought her into the interrogation room, they expected her to deny it. Initially she did, claiming that someone else had killed the tutor and she had only been forced to move the body. But faced with the overwhelming physical evidence, the CCTV footage of her buying bleach, and the search history on her phone, Jung finally confessed. The detectives asked her the one question everyone wanted to know: why? Why did you target a completely innocent woman you had never met? Jung looked at the investigators and delivered a motive so chilling it shocked the entire nation of South Korea. She didn't claim it was for money. She didn't claim it was a robbery gone wrong. She simply stated, "I killed someone just to see what it would feel like." In November 2023, Jung Yoo-jung was sentenced to life in prison. A young woman's life was brutally extinguished simply because a bored, true crime obsessive wanted to test a theory. This case perfectly illustrates the terrifying vulnerability of the modern digital age. Millions of people use gig economy apps every single day. We use them to find rides, order food, hire dog walkers, and find tutors. We inherently trust that the profile on the screen represents a real, verified human being with honest intentions. Jung Yoo-jung proved that the profile is nothing more than a mask, and the app is simply a tool used to unlock your front door. But if a complete stranger can use a tutoring app to get inside your house, what happens when the predator is someone you already know? And what happens when the digital network they weaponize to hunt you down belongs to the government itself? The terrifying reality of the modern gig economy is that it forces us to trust absolute strangers. But what happens when the predator isn't a stranger? What happens when the person hunting you is someone you see every single day, and the digital network they weaponize to track you belongs to your own employer? For 3 years, a 28-year-old woman working for Seoul Metro lived in an absolute state of psychological terror, and the source of that terror was a 31-year-old male colleague named John Joo-hwan. John had developed a severe, relentless obsession with her. What started as unwanted workplace attention quickly escalated into a full-scale digital stalking campaign. Over the course of their time working together, John bombarded her phone with over 350 harassing calls and threatening text messages. But the worst part wasn't just the messages, it was the complete invasion of her privacy. John took his obsession a step further by illegally filming her, using hidden spy cameras to capture invasive footage, which he then used to actively blackmail and terrorize her. Faced with a predator who was methodically destroying her life, the victim did exactly what society tells you to do: she fought back. She went to the police, filed a formal complaint, and handed over the digital evidence. It seemed like the system actually worked. John was arrested. He was immediately relieved of his duties and fired from his job at Seoul Metro. The prosecution took the case seriously, demanding a 9-year prison sentence for his relentless stalking and illegal filming. The trial progressed, and the final sentencing date was officially set for September 15th. In 2022, the victim had survived. She had used the legal system to successfully sever her stalker's access to her life. She thought she was finally safe. But blocking a phone number and firing a predator does not erase your digital footprint, and if an obsessive stalker understands how a system is wired, they will always find a backdoor. John Joo-hwan knew he was going to prison, but instead of accepting his fate, he decided that if his life was going to end, he was going to take hers with him. He wanted pure, premeditated revenge. The day before his final court sentencing, John initiated his plan. He needed to know exactly where the victim was going to be that night, but since she had blocked him everywhere, he had no direct way to track her. So he bypassed her personal devices entirely and hacked the corporation. Despite having been fired and stripped of his official access, John managed to illegally log back into the Seoul Metro internal employee intranet. Navigating through the company's private server, he pulled up his former colleague's exact personnel file. In a matter of seconds, the digital system handed him her current physical location and her precise evening work schedule. He knew exactly what time her shift ended, and he knew she was assigned to Sindang Station in central Seoul. On the evening of September 14th, 2022, John traveled to Sindang Station. This is where the cold, calculating nature of his revenge becomes truly terrifying. John did not want to be caught at the scene. He wanted to execute the murder and walk away cleanly, to ensure he left absolutely no physical evidence behind. So he wore plastic gloves and placed a disposable shower cap tightly over his head, deliberately making sure he wouldn't leave a single strand of hair DNA at the crime scene. Armed with a knife, John bypassed the security cameras, slipped into the women's public restroom at the station and locked himself inside a stall, and then he waited. For over an hour, he stood in complete silence in the restroom, waiting for the victim's shift to end. Eventually, the 28-year-old woman walked through the restroom door, completely unaware that the man she had successfully prosecuted was hiding just a few feet away. The moment she was isolated, John ambushed her. The attack was brutal and unrelenting. The victim fought back, desperately triggering an emergency alarm located inside the bathroom. The alarm alerted other Seoul Metro employees, who immediately sprinted toward the restroom, but by the time they broke through the doors and overpowered John, it was too late. The 28-year-old woman, who had done absolutely everything right to protect herself, died from her injuries. Because of his sheer arrogance and the undeniable evidence, Jeon Ju-hwan's original 9-year stalking sentence was instantly overshadowed by a massive murder trial. The South Korean Supreme Court ultimately combined his charges, and for turning a corporate intranet into a lethal hunting tool, John was sentenced to life in prison. This case shook South Korea to its core because it broke the ultimate social contract. If the police, the courts, and a major corporation cannot protect you from a digital stalker you've already identified, who can? A digital footprint left on a secure work server cost that woman her life. But as terrifying as an obsessed coworker is, at least she knew who was hunting her. What happens when the predator has no identity at all? What happens when the app you download is designed specifically to ensure the person on the other end of the screen is a complete, untraceable ghost? We have seen how predators can weaponize the gig economy to get inside your home. We have seen how a disgruntled, obsessed coworker can manipulate a secure corporate intranet to track your physical movements. In both of those scenarios, the platforms being used were never intended to hide a person's identity. Tutoring apps require profiles. Corporate networks require employee logins. The danger in those cases came from individuals exploiting systems built for trust. But what happens when the application itself is built entirely on the premise of untraceability? What happens when the platform you download to your phone is designed, from the ground up, to ensure that the person on the other side of the screen is an absolute ghost? The most dangerous corners of the South Korean internet are not found on the dark web. So they are found in the App Store under the banner of random chat applications. To understand the sheer terror of these platforms, we have to look at the chilling timeline of Choi Shin-jong. In April 2020, Choi was a 31-year-old man living in Jeonju. To the outside world, he had a compelling background. He was a former promising athlete, having spent his youth competing at a high level in traditional Korean wrestling known as Assyrium. He was strong, disciplined, and physically imposing, but beneath that athletic exterior was a deeply fractured and violent psychology. Choi had crossed the ultimate psychological line. In early April, he targeted a 34-year-old woman who was a personal acquaintance of his wife. He robbed her of her money and a piece of jewelry, violently assaulted her, and then murdered her. To cover his tracks, he drove out to a remote area near a stream in Imsil and unceremoniously dumped her body. For most criminals, the days following a murder are filled with paranoia and panic. But Choi Shin-jong did not panic. In fact, getting away with his first murder gave him a terrifying sense of invincibility. He realized he had the physical capacity to overpower a victim, but he also realized that killing an acquaintance carried too much risk. The police would eventually connect the social dots. He needed a victim who had absolutely no ties to him. He needed someone whose disappearance could never be traced back to his front door. So just 4 days after committing his first murder, Choi turned to his smartphone. He downloaded an anonymous random chatting application. These apps are incredibly popular in South Korea for people looking for quick, untraceable meetups. They require no real names, no verified photos, and no background checks. You simply create a burner profile, and the app connects you with strangers in chat rooms. It is a digital blindfold. Choi logged into the app and began hunting. He scrolled through the anonymous users until he connected with a 29-year-old woman. She lived in the port city of Busan, nearly 250 kilometers away from Choi's location in Jeonju. Through the app's chat interface, Choi began his psychological manipulation. He used the total anonymity of the platform to craft a persona that made her feel comfortable and intrigued. He spent time messaging her, building a false sense of security, until he finally convinced her to leave her city and travel all the way to Jeonju to meet him in person. This is the exact moment the trap snapped shut. By using a random chat app, Choi had achieved the ultimate predator's advantage, complete and total isolation. When the 29-year-old woman boarded her transport and left Busan, nobody in her life knew exactly where she was going. Her friends didn't know who she was meeting because she only knew him by a fake screen name. Her family couldn't check her messages because the chat logs were tied to a burner application. She was walking into the physical world to meet a digital ghost. When she arrived in Jeonju, Choi was waiting for her. The man she met was not the charming persona from the chat room. It was a 31-year-old former wrestler who had just murdered someone 4 days prior. Because he had completely isolated her from her safety network, Choi acted with absolute impunity. He dragged her to his vehicle, where he violently robbed her, assaulted her, and ultimately murdered her. Just as he had done with his first victim, he drove her body to a desolate location, this time a remote fruit farm, and dumped her remains. He thought he had committed the perfect, untraceable string of murders. He believed the random chat app had completely shielded his identity, but Choi underestimated the digital forensic capabilities of the South Korean police. When the victims were reported missing, investigators didn't rely on physical witnesses. They pulled the victims' cellular data, triangulated GPS pings, and painstakingly traced the digital data packets from the random chat application directly back to Choi's physical phone. When the police arrested him, the physical evidence was overwhelming. They found the bodies. They had the digital footprints. Choi was backed into a corner. But instead of showing a shred of remorse, Choi attempted to exploit a notorious loophole in the South Korean legal system. During his highly publicized trial, he stood before the judge and claimed that he could not actually remember raping, robbing, or killing the women. His official legal excuse? He claimed he was under the influence of drugs while he was using the app and committing the murders. He was hoping the court would grant him physical and mental leniency, significantly reducing his sentence on the grounds of diminished capacity. It was a sickening attempt to avoid accountability for meticulously hunting two human beings. The judge, however, saw right through the manipulation. The court completely rejected his excuse, pointing directly to the highly credible and calculated statements Choi had initially given upon his arrest, proving he was fully aware of his actions. The judge noted his absolute lack of regret and the sheer brutality of using an app to lure a woman to her death. Choi Shin-jong was found guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison, permanently removing him from society. As an additional measure, the court ordered that his identity be unmasked to the public and mandated that he must wear an electronic tracking device for 30 years to ensure law enforcement always knows his exact location. The man who used an untraceable app to hide in the shadows will now spend the rest of his life being monitored every single second of the day. When we look at South Korea from the outside, we see a miracle of modern safety. The physical streets are protected by one of the most advanced camera networks on Earth. But as these three cases prove, the applications on our phones are completely blind. From a gig economy tutoring platform used to unlock a victim's front door, to a secure corporate intranet manipulated to track a coworker's every move, to anonymous random chats designed to hide a killer's face, the internet has given predators a digital skeleton key to our lives. The monsters aren't waiting in dark alleys anymore. They are sitting in our pockets. Which of these three apps do you think is the most dangerous to use in 2026? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments. If you think South Korea's internet is dark, wait until you see the horrors hiding on the networks in Turkey. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it.